Hello, everybody. This is your background info on bonding and R groups. So, what is a chemical bond? A chemical bond is when two atoms share electrons covalently, such as a carbon atom bonded to another carbon atom like this. So, if you recall, carbon has 4 valence electrons. You can tell because carbon has 6 electrons normally, but 2 of those electrons are in the first shell, which is not reactive. The second shell is reactive because it's not full. A full valence shell would have 8 electrons, but carbon only has 4. So what would that look like? Well, carbon have 4 electrons spaced around like this, and all of them are unpaired. So electrons like to form pairs of 2. So if we had another carbon atom like this, you can see that these 2 atoms can come together and then form a structure like this, where the carbons share these 2 electrons in the middle. Well, all of these electrons remain unpaired. But carbon doesn't like this. It still has a lot of unpaired electrons. So normally what happens is carbon will take one of the most simple elements that exists, hydrogen, which only has 1 electron as well. And then it'll basically fill up all of its empty spots with hydrogen electrons. And that will look like this. Now look, every carbon atom is satisfied because it has 8 electrons in its shell and it's full. So right now, we've created a molecule called ethane. Yeah, and different elements, as you saw with hydrogen, have different amounts of electrons. So nitrogen has 1 more electron than carbon, so it'll have 5. It means it'll only have 3 unpaired electrons. Oxygen has 6 electrons in its valence shell, so it'll have only 2 unpaired electrons. The amount of unpaired electrons also determines the amount of bonds it can form. So nitrogen can form 3 bonds like that. Oxygen can only form 2 bonds, and carbon can form 4 bonds. A atom can also form multiple bonds with the same atom. So for example, carbon might form 2 bonds with another carbon. In this case, 2 electrons remain unpaired because over here, what you'll see is something like this. There are 4 electrons being shared by these 2 carbon atoms. And so carbon will have 2 other spots for bonding. And what would happen here is it would also just commonly take a hydrogen like that and form a structure like this. This is called ethene. So now we have a decent background on how bonding works. Now we can talk about what an R group is. So let's say we have a structure like this. We have 3 carbon atoms and they're all bonded to hydrogens. You can see that each carbon atom is making 4 bonds. And each hydrogen atom is making 1 bond, because hydrogen only has 1 electron, and 1 unpaired electron to be specific. So, an R group is just a stand-in for any chemical structure that would be able to be attached to a bigger molecule, or a smaller molecule, or any molecule. So, how would we represent that? Well, we just replace one of the hydrogens with an R. So what can an R be? Well, R can just be a hydrogen. So that's what we had before. Like this. R could be a CH3. Like this. How would we represent that fully? Well, there would be a carbon atom bonding to this atom, and then there would be 3 electrons. 3 hydrogens, because carbon has 3 more unpaired electrons. So that would look like this. What else? R could be an OH, or a hydroxyl group. That would look like this, because remember, oxygen forms 2 bonds. So 1 bond is to a hydrogen, 1 bond is to this carbon. So that would look like this. R could also contain a nitrogen. Right now we seem to have a pattern. We have an atom, such as carbon or oxygen, and then we have a corresponding amount of hydrogens attached to that atom, depending on how many bonds it can form. So carbon can make 4 bonds. So one of the bonds must be attached to this carbon here, but the other 3 bond to hydrogens. Oxygen makes 2 bonds, one bond is to the carbon here, and the other bond is to a hydrogen. So I'll give you a moment to think how many hydrogens must be attached to this nitrogen atom. The answer is 2. What would that look like? It would look like this. And if we were to draw that into our structure, it would look like this. Now, when we change the R groups, we change the chemical properties of our structure. So, for example, when we originally had just a hydrogen as our R group, the structure was pretty small. But when we attached this big CH3 group at the end, it became quite a bit bigger. That would change properties such as melting and boiling point. When we introduce an OH or an NH2, we also change the properties, because these groups are polar, which means the oxygen and the nitrogen pull electrons away from all the other atoms, causing a partial negative region and partial positive region on all the other everywhere else. That can also have different chemical and physical properties. Yeah, so hope this was a good tutorial, and good luck during C3.